Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be a recap of the latest Conjuring movie which was released this year. Before we begin, I wanna say that there's gonna be a lot of spoilers ahead. The movie begins with the exorcism of an 8-year-old boy named David Glatzel. Ed, Lorraine and their cameraman Drew were at the Glatzel house. They were waiting for Father Gordon to start the exorcism. Ed tells David to have some shut-eye before Father Gordon arrives and proceed with the exorcism. Arne, David's sister's boyfriend, carries David to his bed. Arne tells David that he is a very brave kid for dealing with the situation he is going through. David tells Arne that he doesn't feel very brave sometimes, to which Arne replied, "Being brave does not mean that you are not scared, it means being scared, but you're hanging in there." This scene reminds me of the time Mufasa tells Simba about being brave. Few moments after the arrival of Father Gordon, David wakes up to a door knock he hears. He rushed into the bathroom and locks the door behind him. Suddenly the bathroom doorknob started shaking violently. David hid himself in the bathtub and closed the curtain. The parents hear a scream from David's room. They rushed into the room, then they heard a glass shatter in the bathroom. David's father manages to break the door and sees David sitting in the corner. Before David's father could react, David ran towards him and pricked his leg with a piece of glass he broke from the bathroom mirror. Ed manages to pull away David from Mr. Glatzel and carries him downstairs to do the exorcism, but the evil entity would not let go easily. As Ed carries David down, the evil entity started clinging into the walls. Ed forced his way down, leaving scratch marks on the wall. They put him down on a table. He is drooling, sweating, and even growling badly. Drew, the cameraman, started recording the exorcism. Ed, Lorraine, Arne, and David's sister Debbie held David down, while Father Gordon started praying. David became even more violent when Father Gordon threw droplets of holy water at him. While this was happening, Lorraine gets a vision of an altar with lots of candles and objects used by cults. She did not care much about the vision as she did not know what to make of it. Everything goes quiet for a second or two, then the plates in the cupboard behind them started flying at them. Everyone manages to dodge the plates, except Father Gordon. A plate knocks his head and he is unconscious on the floor. Ed takes the book and started reading. Debbie is freaked out and worried about what is happening to her brother. Then Arne starts talking to the evil entity, which only provoked it further. But Ed tells him to stop talking. David pushes Arne and Debbie onto the floor and breaks free. He then jumps onto Ed and tries to stop his heart. Arne quickly stands up and pulls away David from Ed. He then tells the entity to take him instead and leave David alone. The entity listens and moves on to Arne. With everyone down, Ed was the only one who saw what happened, but is too weak to speak after the attack. David faints and everything goes back to normal. Noticing Ed on the floor, Lorraine tells to quickly call an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctor tells Lorraine that Ed had a major heart attack and that they are going to insert a stent into the artery to get the blood flowing back to the heart. At the Glatzel house, everything was fine for a few days. Arne and Debbie carried out with their regular daily routine, and David is all good and healthy. Until things started going back to how they were. Maybe even worse than before. Back at the hospital, Ed's operation is complete. Father Gordon has come to visit him and finds Lorraine was still at the hospital. He tells her to go home and have some rest. Lorraine then tells the story about how they met 30 years ago, at a movie theater. And that she could go back to the house, but her home is wherever he was. The next day, Arne comes back home early from work, because he was not feeling well. Bruno, the landlord, offers Arne a drink and tells him to get drunk with him. At the same time in the hospital, Ed wakes up. Lorraine and their daughter Judy was next to him. He tells Lorraine that the demon is inside Arne. Worried, Lorraine then contacts the police and warns them that something bad is going to happen at the Glatzel house. Arne is now starting to see and hear things that aren't real. He makes his way to the kitchen to wash his face. When he hears a scream from Debbie, he rushes back to the living room, and sees that Bruno is trying to bite a chunk of flesh out of Debbie. He pushed Bruno and takes Debbie away from him. Confused as to what is going on with Arne, Bruno goes near Arne. But Arne sees him as an evil entity trying to hurt him. He grabs a knife and stabs Bruno 22 times. Under the state of possession, he goes out of the house and walks on the road with blood all over his hands and shirt. A police officer sees him and arrests him. The next day, Ed and Lorraine goes to visit Arne, worried that the demon might still be inside him. But he is fine. He was able to read from the Bible, which confirms that he is not possessed. Ed tells him that even if he is not possessed now, does not mean that he was not possessed before. Debbie tells that Arne is not capable of doing something like this and that he is innocent. Ed, Lorraine, and Debbie goes to meet Arne's lawyer and tries to convince her to tell the court that he was under the influence of the devil and that the devil made him do it. Ed also states that the court accepts the existence of God every time a witness swears to tell the truth. I think it's time they accepted the existence of the devil. Ed then invites the lawyer for dinner at their house, and to show the objects they have collected throughout the years. The following day in the courthouse she defended Arne, saying that he was possessed. The judge did not know what to make of it, and due to the lack of evidence, Arne might face the death penalty. Therefore, it's up to Ed and Lorraine to find more evidence about Arne being possessed. Ed and Lorraine goes back to the Glatzel house to find out more about how it all started. When searching the house, they find a witch's totem. Ed tells them to mail the picture of the totem to all the police departments, to get information if they have seen anything like this. Father Gordon tells that he knows another priest who studied about satanic cults, and that he might be able to help them learn more about the totem. His name is Father Kastner. Ed and Lorraine went to visit Father Kastner. Father Kastner has a little chicken farm and was collecting eggs from the chickens when Ed and Lorraine arrived. They show the pictures to Father Kastner. He tells them that he has seen totems like this in the past. But this one is different, it's more complicated and a nasty piece of work. He then takes them into a basement downstairs. Inside, the room was filled with satanic objects that Father Kastner collected when he studied the Ram cult. He tells them that the clues that they seek might be in the room. He warns Ed and Lorraine that they should not take this lightly and must be careful. That night, Arne started to see and hear strange things. He understood that the demon that has possessed earlier is back to taunt him again. The next day, Ed gets a call from Drew. He tells him that a homicide detective in Danvers wants to talk with them about the totem. Ed and Lorraine immediately went to meet the detective. The detective tells them that two girls went missing about 4 months ago. Katie and Jessica. They found Katie's body in a forest nearby, stabbed 22 times. Jessica's body is still missing. When they searched Jessica's home, they found a totem. The same one found at the Glatzel house. Ed tells the detective that Jessica might be cursed, to which the detective takes it as a joke and tells them that he is only interested in leads grounded in reality. Lorraine tells him that she can see what others cannot. The detective then brings 3 knives from the evidence locker in his office. He tells Lorraine to pick the correct knife used to kill Jessica. Ed is pissed. He tells the detective that his wife's ability is a gift and not a sideshow attraction. Lorraine picked the correct knife and the detective is surprised. He agrees to help them. They went to the crime scene where Lorraine gets a vision of what happened that night. She sees Jessica and Katie were happily enjoying their time in the woods, but suddenly Jessica gets possessed and stabs Kate. Frightened, Jessica runs away from Katie's body. Because of the dark she could not see where she was running and falls into the river. Lorraine also almost falls to her death, but Ed manages to catch her. The detective brings a recovery team to the place and finds a body. He thanks them and tells them that he will send the case file in the morning. As they reached home, Debbie calls, crying and sounds worried. She said that the demon has followed Arne into the prison and that it's telling him to take his life. The same night, Arne could not sleep. he was just sitting on his bed. Father Newman arrives and gives him a glass bottle of holy water and leaves him. Arne then sits and pours the water around him, hoping that it would protect him. Lorraine and Ed are discussing about how to stop what's happening to Arne. Lorraine tells the visions she had at the night of David's exorcism and that the connection might still be open in Jessica's body. Ed did not like the idea but decided to proceed with it. They make their way to the funeral house. It was closed. Ed breaks the glass and opens the door. They found Jessica's body. Lorraine makes contact with Jessica's hand. At first she does not get anything. But in her second attempt she was able to make the connection. She finds herself in tunnel. She could hear the rattling sound of a train engine. It's dark and there were lots leaves and roots growing on the walls, an old staircase as well. Next Lorraine finds the altar where the spell was cast. There were lots of black candles, satanic books and other ritualistic objects. Lorraine also sees a picture of Arne. Soon Lorraine realizes what is about to happen. The woman is trying to complete the curse by having Arne kill himself. Lorraine interferes, causing the connection between Arne and the women to break. Arne becomes unconscious. The prison guard sees his hand bleeding and calls for help. The woman sees Lorraine. It seems like the connection works both ways. All of a sudden, the light goes off. Ed goes to turn the switch on. He notices a body missing. He turns around and sees the body standing upright. He tells Lorraine to break the connection. All of a sudden the corpse turns to Lorraine and starts running at her. Ed gets to Lorraine quicker and pulls her away from the path. The connection breaks and the corpse falls onto the ground. On their way home, Ed brought the case files with him. Debbie and Drew were at their house. Drew tells him that Arne is fine and that they have sedated him. Drew also was able to get a book about witchcraft. Ed reads the passage written in Latin. It tells that the curse needs 2 human sacrifice, one by murder and one by suicide. The only way to break the curse is to break the altar that it was cast from. The rest is written in Aramaic and no one could read it. As Ed stands up to take a look at the case files, he faints. Ed wakes up and finds himself in bed. He calls for Lorraine, but no one answers. It looks like no one is home. He comes out and sees the main door open and Lorraine's cross is laying on the floor. He hears a sound from behind him. He turns back and sees the women. She tells Ed not to give up as he is very close to solving the case, and disappears. The corpse from the funeral house appears and tries to attack Ed. He manages to avoid it. Holding the cross towards the corpse, he starts a prayer. The corpse backs off. And Ed takes a knife to stab it. Drew stops Ed. Lorraine was in front of Ed. The entire thing was not real. Ed was seeing things. Then Ed realizes what's going on. He quickly goes around the house, searching for something. At the office, he sees a vase of flowers that look like they were made of ash. He breaks it and finds a witch's totem inside it. Ed has been cursed. Desperate more than ever, they start working more to find the woman who is cursing them. Drew and Ed are going to check into the case files and find if there are more clues to find why David and Jessica were her targets. Debbie will go and stay with Arne, and Lorraine is going to meet Father Kastner to read the Aramaic parts of the book. When Drew and Ed started mapping out the locations where the 3 totems were placed by the woman, they see a pattern. 3 of the totems were placed not far from each other. Ed speculates that the women lived close by. He then tries to find places in the area that relates Lorraine's vision. There are 3 train tracks in the area. Only one of them is working during the night and it crosses the river. Ed figures out where the women and the altar is located, and knew that horrible events would happen that night. He takes Drew's car keys and tells him to call the cops to come to the location as fast as they can. Lorraine is already at Father Kastner's house. He tells Lorraine that according to the text, for the curse to complete, there must be 3 victims: the child, the lover, and the man of God. He then takes her to the basement and hands Lorraine a photo book. In the book are pictures of a child. Father Kastner tells that he has a daughter. The mother died on childbirth and that he had to raise her in secret. Lorraine sees a picture of the girl grown up. She recognizes her as the woman she saw in her visions. She is shocked. Asked him why he did not tell them when they first visited him for help. "She is my daughter," he said. And warns Lorraine that they must be very careful about how their obsession gets passed down to their children.
How our obsessions are passed to our children.
They both hear footsteps. The woman has arrived. Father Kastner leads Lorraine into a secret door that leads to the underground tunnel, where her altar is. He goes back to his table and takes out a gun to protect himself. But it was no use, the women killed him. Lorraine was able to see what happened. She is now frightened and alone in the tunnel. She runs quickly to find the altar. At the hospital, Debbie is beside Arne, who is sleeping, and is cuffed into the bed. Father Newman is praying. Arne wakes up and tells them that he can sense the woman is close by. Lorraine finds the altar and tries to topple it over. But it's not possible. The altar is very heavy and won't move easily. The woman approaches the altar and Lorraine runs away. Outside, Ed has finally arrived. He gets out and calls for Lorraine. He hears a scream coming from a door that leads underground. It is locked. He breaks the lock and makes his way down into the tunnel. As Lorraine tries to escape, the women corner her and tries to kill her. She escapes by hitting the woman's head with a stone on the ground. As Ed is running around to find Lorraine, the woman gets close to him and blows something into his face. Ed falls onto the ground. The woman goes back to the altar to complete the curse. Lorraine finds Ed. He is mindlessly swinging his hammer at Lorraine. Lorraine asks Ed to stop, but he continues. At the hospital, Arne is facing a serious situation. He is shaking violently. Debbie tries to calm him down, while Father Newman continues the prayer. All of a sudden the lights go out. Arne starts to growl and moves in such a way his joints would snap. He manages to pull his hand out of the cuff and falls on the floor. He raised above the floor and he tries to cut his neck with a piece of glass. But Debbie stops him. At the tunnels, Lorraine gets cornered again. This time her back is against the altar. She then somehow makes Ed remember what is happening and who is the enemy. Ed comes back to his normal state and breaks the altar with the hammer. Everything goes back to normal. Arne drops on the floor. He is safe. At the tunnel, Ed and Lorraine are also not harmed. The altar is broken and now the curse is over. Since the curse is over, the demon will return to hell with the soul of the women. The demon kills the woman and takes her soul. They are all relieved. Everyone is now safe from harm's way. The police arrives a few minutes later and checks on the house. The next day Arne was back at the courthouse. He did not get the death sentence. He was convicted of manslaughter and served 5 years in prison. He got married to Debbie while he was in prison. That is the recap of Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. I hope you enjoyed. Please leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. Also, if you have any suggestion for another recap, please make sure to leave it in the comment below. Bye for now.